Welcome to the Grow My Salon Business podcast, where we focus on the business side of hairdressing. I'm your host, Anthony Whitaker, and I'll be talking to thought leaders in the hairdressing industry, discussing insightful, provocative, and inspiring ideas that matter. So get ready to learn, get ready to be challenged, get ready to be inspired, and most importantly, get ready to grow your salon business. Hey, it's Anthony Whitaker here, and welcome to today's episode of the Grow My Salon Business podcast. I've always been fascinated with what makes people successful in any area of life. And as I'm a hairdresser, it's always made sense to be finding out what makes people successful in the hairdressing industry. Now, years before podcasting was a thing, I produced a collection of interviews called Unplugged, where I interviewed a range of people from the hairdressing industry. And one of them was a true hairdressing master, Mr. Kerry Warn, who Nicole Kidman describes as being the best hairdresser in the world. When I'm interviewing people these days, I very rarely talk a lot about their journey into hairdressing. But when I interviewed Kerry, I was intrigued to find out about his background and the journey of how he got to where he is today. He's been the man responsible for producing iconic hairstyles for a whole list of movies such as Eyes Wide Shut, The Stepford Wives, The Great Gatsby, Bewitched, Mrs. America, Grace of Monaco, Bladerunner, to name a few. And you would have seen his work on the world's biggest fashion catwalks and on the cover of leading fashion magazines and on the most high-profile celebrities from the world of music, fashion, and entertainment. Today's podcast is an interview that was done in 2015, and Kerry is still very much active today. But what stood out most when talking to him 8 years ago was his humility, his charm, and his insights into fashion and hair and beauty. I think he has a depth of knowledge that is something that is often missing today. Kerry's story and his life in general is an amazing journey of commitment, dedication, and passion that I just know you're going to be inspired by. So without further ado, welcome Mr. Kerry Warn.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and thank you for talking to me.
Yes, my pleasure. It's great to have you here. Right, so look, let's start at the beginning, because I think you've got an amazing story, your life story. I've had the pleasure of interviewing you before, and I know a little bit about your background, and have done some more research since we were last together. And I just think you have the most fascinating life story. I will just sort of introduce it and then let you flesh it out. I know that you were born in a place called Mount Barker, which is situated approximately 250 miles south of Perth in Western Australia. And it's got a very small population there of around 2,000 people. And for anyone who doesn't know, Perth is the most isolated city on the planet. And you were 250 miles or 400k from Perth, so that makes it extremely isolated. So, I really want to go back to the beginning and start with your life story as to how you turned into this hairdresser extraordinaire that works with some of the most talented and creative people in the world of fashion and movie as a hairdresser. So, over to you.
Well, Anthony, I think probably my first introduction really to hairdressing was my sister, Gloria. She was a hairdresser. So when I was about about 9, 10 years old, I used to drop by the salon after school and go and sort of hang out. And I was intoxicated by the smell of perming lotion, nail polish remover. And to me, to this day, even though there are hardly any perming lotion smells around salons and things like this, even nail polish remover, to me, tells me glamour. There's something, it's about transformation, it's about glamour, and to me it was exciting. And to be able to do that to someone, to be able to transform someone, I think that I'm, putting the pieces together in my mind, I think that's probably what got me interested in hairdressing for sure.
Okay, so before that, this place you've grown up in, which I'd never even heard of until I did some research. But, what was it like as a kid growing up in a country town? When are we talking? 50s, 60s?
50s.
I mean, what was that like, growing up in an environment like that?
Amazing sense of freedom, open space, obviously. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. So we had a pretty pretty easy sort of life, I guess. There was no fear of like big city life or pressure of things, but I always felt like I had to escape, and I don't know whether it was escape professionally or creatively or we used to live near where we lived on the main street was just near the town hall where they used to have the pictures showing twice a week.
Right.
So, and I was absolutely fascinated with that, and I was sort of like fascinated with the way people looked in it. I thought, these people are born the most extraordinary looking creatures in the world.
Yeah.
Not realising that age, they probably went through hair and makeup, costume and lighting and all the rest of the things. And I thought that everybody, including my sisters and brothers, should all be looking like these people.
Right, even though they were in a small country town.
Yeah, exactly. But
right,
it's still, to me, when I look back, they did look glamorous.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a sense of care that was taken, and I think it was of the time. And I suppose what happens, we all do look back at old photographs or family pictures of things, and how incredibly well turned out people looked at a certain period.
Mm.
Now, I think it was because they were going to have their photograph taken, so they made an effort to brush their hair and
put their best frock on.
Yeah, or put their coat on, or buttoned up, or whatever.
Yeah.
Polish their shoes. Or,
sure.
And I guess it's part of things, but I think people, when they went out in public, there was a certain sense of, and it wasn't necessarily about money or finance or how rich or poor you were. It was about presenting yourself in the best way, even if you went down to the town shopping or whatever. So, and I think that's very, very important. I think it's something that I sort of miss today. And I think it's always so inspiring when you go somewhere or you'll see someone walking down the street that looks immaculately turned out, and it might be particularly your taste, but you think, oh my God, what an effort. And you do see certain older women doing that, and you think, oh my God, the energy and the dedication that takes, that's absolutely admirable to me.
Yeah, I agree. So did you, as a kid, did you feel a bit like a fish out of water?
Well, I sort of... Funny enough, going to these movies kicked off a whole other thing in me as well. I used to go to movies, I saw musicals, I saw Fred Astaire and Gene Rogers dancing on the screen. I thought, I wouldn't mind trying dancing. Why not?
I heard that you did have a period of time where you were really wanting to be an aspiring ballet dancer, yeah?
Well, I studied, well, the only dance classes in town were classical ballet.
Yeah.
Unbeknown to my father, I taught my mother into going to ballet class, which was on Saturday morning, which I wasn't a very good dancer. So but I liked the idea. But I think it was a sort of a good discipline too, because I don't say I was, maybe I was an undisciplined child, I think.
So this is real Billy Elliot stuff, isn't it?
Well, I think it tends to sound like that now, but I don't think it. And to me, it was never. When I was a kid, it was just sort of something. I've seen other people do it. Why can't I do it? I didn't understand why it got so complex with everybody around me.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand. Because, you're sort of at that age, you're not thinking anything sexual or anything like this. You're just thinking, I'd like to be able to do that. I'd like to leap across the room and spin in the air and fly upside down and do all those sort of things. It feels like there's part of the circus mentality.
Yeah.
And I guess, in a way, it was, I didn't think anything strange about it. I think everybody else around me was very sort of concerned.
Yeah. Well, I suppose growing up in a country town in Australia, in the 50s, there weren't a lot of boys that wanted to do ballet in the class.
Well, I suppose not. They weren't. I was the only one.
Yeah.
And my father found out by drinking in the pub, and one of his mates come in and said, "Oh, your son's in the same class." There were a few words said that evening. That F's going on in this house that he didn't know about. Anyway, to appraise him. I said, "Okay, I'll stay with the ballet, but I had to do football practice in the afternoon.
Right, so you did both?
I did both.
Right,
Saturday
okay.
was a busy day for me.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And I was absolutely lousy at football anyway,
Yeah.
you know.
So where did you first start hairdressing? Yeah. How did that come about?
Well, actually, see, my father was had racehorses on the country circuit in Mount Barker. There's a town nearby called Albany, and any of them that showed any promise, he would send to Perth to a guy called Jimmy McNamara. Now, Jimmy McNamara was a trainer in Perth and had some quite successful horses going. His daughter, Kay McNamara, was married to a very well-known hairdresser in Perth called Ernest Grady.
Yeah.
So, put two and two together, my father said his kid's interested in doing some hairdressing. I don't think he should do it, but will you give him a chance? And Jimmy said, Jimmy said he'll speak to his son-in-law. Yeah. So hence he did, and they thought they'll give me a try, and they could always send me back home and sort of see how it went. So anyway, I went up to meet Ernest. I started work there, and 6 months later, my dad's trying to talk me into sort of like, when am I coming back home? And I said, no, I didn't want to work in the bakery, and I was happy doing what I was doing, and I remember this wonderful conversation. We were driving from Perth back to Mount Barker, and my dad's looking straight ahead and obviously on the road and says, Kerry, why can't you do just once in your life, do something normal? And I thought, it's probably not going to happen.
No.
Anyway,
exactly. Yeah.
But anyway,
there was no truth to the story that your father paid your wages to the
No, but he did have to pay for my board.
Right.
Because I wasn't making any money. I lived in the city. Yeah. And I lived with his sister, my Aunt Annie, who was absolutely gorgeous, lovely.
So how long did you stay in Perth?
For 5 years. I actually, from 17 till I was 22, actually.
Yeah.
I did my apprenticeship, which was 5 years in those days.
Yeah. All in the one salon?
All in one salon, passed all my exams. And then, towards the end, I was doing a lot of like charity things to raise money for disabled children and things like this. So I was doing hair shows, so to speak, but created in our own way, using the girls from the salon as my models, because I couldn't obviously afford models, the industry was so small, as you can imagine, in Perth. So I just sort of like, all my girls I work with, they suddenly became my girls that I turned into icons.
So what was the impetus for you to leave Perth and go to London?
I thought, I have to try. My question was, would I go to Sydney? And I thought, you know what, Sydney's going to be there. Yeah. London mightn't always be there for me because of the, and I think every young person feels that they feel like, you don't feel like you can conquer the world, but you feel like you can deal with it.
So how did you make that transition? So you're in Perth, you've made that decision, you decide to move to London. Was there any...
Well, basically, obviously I was doing an apprenticeship, so I wasn't making a lot of money. And so we had a bunch of clients coming into the salon, and sort of from different walks of life. We had a lot of legal people, doctors, quite across the board, but we also had some of our ladies of the night, girls, which were the more fun clients. I like to, so to speak. Anyway, there's this wonderful lady called Dorrie Murray, who was the madam, and she used to be a hairdresser. So she was sort of quite keen on hairdressing and looks and things, and she was quite an extraordinary character herself. In those days, she had bleached white hair, and she used to wear a lot of white, I remember, a lot of white A-line shift dresses and things like this. And I suppose the closest thing I could say was probably like a Dusty Springfield look.
Right.
So she loved her sort of elaborate sort of chignons and bouffant hairdos and things like this. I got into doing her hair for her because she was looking at my work and seeing what I was doing for these sort of hair shows and things like this. And I was fascinated with her because she had the most beautiful hair pieces I've ever seen. Okay. And that's what, before I was allowed to touch anybody's hair in the salon, I was given the job of washing everybody's hair pieces and cleaning them and getting them ready, because obviously in those days, basically most women had a wig wardrobe.
Right.
Which I think is one thing that's absolutely missing these days.
Yeah.
I think to have an instant chignon sitting in the cupboard when you've got to suddenly go to a cocktail party, fantastic. Put it on and go. You know, I don't think there's enough of. I don't think there's people have enough flamboyancy about the hair these days. I think it's also all become a little bit more normal and sort of like they want it to look as real, like gluing in extensions. Why not put on half a wig? It's easier. Take it off that night. You know, you don't have to sleep with someone else's hair on their head. You know what I mean? Yeah. You get to have the look and have you know, the mileage from it and look as great the next day because you've taken it off and haven't slept in it. You know? Anyway, so what happened is Dory said to me, would I like to go over to her places of work after work and give the girls a sort of comb out and a bit of a buff up and sort of resurrect them from the day's job, I guess. So I did. And with that money, you know, the girls paid me cash. With that money, I put aside and got my fare to be able to come to London. Okay,
fantastic. So what year was that when you arrived in London?
1972.
Where did you start working then?
I went for a job in Knightsbridge, and it was like a terrible place. And I thought, oh God, do I really, you know, this is not what London's about for me. You know, it was always a bit like, oh God, you know, I didn't really want to be in it's sort of like a salon that wasn't happening. And at that point, someone said, oh, you know, they said, oh, you're Australian. This is an Australian guy working at Elizabeth Arden on Bond Street. I thought, if he can get a job, I should be able to get a job. Probably some fantastic hairdresser here. This kid thinking, you know, he could do it, I could do it. So I went in for an interview, got the job, and from my little portfolio I had from Perth, from newspaper clippings from shows I'd done, newspaper stuff and shoots I'd done in Australia, probably about 4 pages thick of stuff. I got the job, and the following week I had to do the hair for a fashion show within the Elizabeth Arden at that time was on Bond Street. It's where the Louis Vuitton shop is now on Bond Street.
Right.
And it was like 5 floors of beauty. So, and they had a clothing place in the front, you know, selling dresses and all Elizabeth Arden makeup and perfumery. So they had a fashion show, and they said, right, you're doing the hair for it. So I did. I was sort of a bit nervous, but, you know, I'd done my hair shows, so I thought, you know, I know what I'm doing. So I did, and everyone sort of thought it was fantastic.
And you're 22 or something now?
Yes.
22, yeah.
And then at that point, they were doing some ads for some makeup for Elizabeth Arden. Makeup in London, they said, you know, could you do the hair for the photo shoot? So it was my first, I guess, London photo shoot. You know, I'd done sort of bits and pieces where I'd done someone's hair in a salon in Australia, and they'd gone to a studio and been photographed. This was actually in a studio, and I was actually doing the hair. And it was done for Hairdresser's Journal. And when the Hairdresser's Journal come out, it's written across it, the look that is London. Oh God, I've only been here a bloody couple of weeks. You know what I mean? So, but anyway, I'm not going to say anything. That's absolutely fine. From that, the beauty editor at Vogue, whose name was Felicity Clark at the time, saw it and decided to book myself, the makeup artist, and the model to recreate the look with David Bailey for a Vogue cover, and that was 1972.
So you've literally just got off the plane, and all of a sudden, within a period of what, 6 months or less?
Probably about 12 months, I suppose.
Okay, you're doing a Vogue cover with David Bailey. Fantastic. And what happened then? So you then decided this is what you want to do. You don't want to
I thought I was fantastic. I did it like this, but not realizing that once you've done it, and it's sort of once it goes off the newsstand, you're sort of no longer flavour of the month sort of thing. So it's sort of then I decided this editorial career that I wanted to pursue. So I did, and I sort of worked for a lot of various magazines. I didn't actually really do any more Vogue covers until about 1976 or 77, around about that time. I did a few shoots and things, but when I finished anyway, but working with Elizabeth Arden, I went on, and then I decided, I wasn't really quite fulfilled in what I was doing. So I went to work for Leonard, and he used to have a whole house that was just behind the American Embassy. And so I worked there. That's where I first met John Frieda and a lot of other, excellent hairdressers. And Leonard had a big, a lot of his staff were out doing photo shoots and things. He was very much the man of the moment in the 70s, with an incredibly creative team like Daniel Galvin doing colour, and you had Celine doing the most amazing hair, and Oliver from Leonard's doing hair, and John, and like amazing sort of people, like a team of people. So you're in an incredibly creative environment, which is only can be inspiring. It's like anything. It's like working with talented people that inspire you. You can only learn. Unless you've got blindfolded and then you don't. Obviously, you wouldn't learn anything. But you really need that to be walking around with blinkers on, not to learn, sort of thing. Yeah. And it was a great learning experience.
So this sort of period of time was running parallel to the sort of Sassoon explosion of hairdressing in London at the same time, wasn't it?
Leonard was a big hit. Sassoon was more 60s, and,
right.
And now we're talking 70s.
Okay.
And it's all more like Zandra Rhodes and all those sort of looks. You sort of like Grace Coddington's sort of 70s look with all the hennaed hair, all frizzed out and things. That was all Leonard.
Right.
Quite extraordinary looks, what was going on.
So who were the photographers you were working with in this period?
Well, there was obviously Bailey, Terence Donovan. I worked a few times with Duffy. They were the sort of London-based photographers. Then when I started working much more for Vogue, there was those guys plus some Norman Parkinson. I did quite a bit with him in the early 70s as well. And then like Toscani and Alex Chatelain and Fabrizio Ferri and it goes on and on and on and on, and it's sort of endless. So because suddenly I got taken into Vogue and taken under their wing and worked with them solidly for about 4 or 5 years. Sort of nearly 4 days a week, nearly every week.
Really? So you were like the resident Vogue hairdresser?
I wouldn't have said resident, but basically I wasn't in the salon. I was there promoting. And at that point, I'd working for Molton Brown.
Yeah.
I'd left Leonard's, went back for a little stint. I got enticed back to Arden.
Yeah.
And then when I went back, I realised, this is the wrong move. And then I went and met with Harvey Collis, who owned Molton Brown, and got the job. And then had to retrain again from retraining with Leonard, and then retraining again with Molton Brown, because Molton Brown was a whole other realm of hairdressing in those days. It was incredibly creative, but with a natural force. Sort of they didn't want to use hair dryers. They used drying the hair naturally with your hands. It was a whole other sort of method, and which was invaluable for me for what I which I didn't know at the time I was going to go on and do film. Sure. But how to do hair naturally is actually quite beneficial, because I'd learned the artifice. Not that I was great at it, but I learned how to construct and how to deconstruct. But to actually work with hair in its raw, natural form is actually quite something else entirely, and to know when to pull back and not when to go to take too much, especially like for instance, I'm probably leaping ahead a bit here.
No,
but
when
you're working for film and things, so suddenly, if someone's meant to have crawled out of the shower and fallen asleep, sort of thing, how does that hair look? What is it saying? And I think this is where it comes into character building, and what is not totally dissimilar to photographic shoots. It's like, what are you saying to the public that are watching? If the hair wakes up and the hair's done and she's got full makeup on, it's like, it's not believable. If the hair looks sort of slightly mussed and, sort of undone and sort of free form, it tells the story without actually saying anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Did you work behind the chair there in Molton Brown?
Yes, yeah.
So you did a column of clients?
Yes, yeah. Plus, when I was in the salon.
Doing session work?
But doing a lot of session work and stuff like this, which was fantastic.
Okay.
I think a lot of passion has gone out of hairdressing in some sense, you know what I mean? And I don't know whether it's because of, maybe it's because of the instantaneous of a blow-dry bar. You can walk in and just have your hair done, and sort of you probably wouldn't even know that person's name that's done your hair or have an affiliation with them. And I think it's quite a personal thing. You're touching someone, you're in someone's space. And I think it's important to know them, to even before you start the hair, to talk to them, to consult with them, to sort of see what sort of person you're dealing with. It's a different situation if it's a model or an actress and you're putting them into a character or into a mode of something. But if you're cutting someone's hair off or changing their colour and things, I think it's quite important to know as much as you can, or as much as they'll allow you to know about them. So you can actually make them feel as good as they can possibly feel. I mean, that's what we're there for. We're there to enhance. We're there to elevate it. You know what I mean? You don't want to go to the hairdresser and come out feeling worse than you when you walked in.
It's the ideal situation.
It's a bit.
So then you left London. You went to New York for a period of time, didn't you?
So when in the late 70s. I decided, I was going into New York at this point. I was doing a lot of editorial. I was going into New York to do various shoots and things, and I decided that I'll give it a go. So I packed my bags, off I go to New York, and I stayed there for 14 years.
So was that seen as the Mecca for you at the time?
I think it was very. I think it was very important to me because it also sort of. Like I've sort of mentioned before, I think the discipline of New York was very, very important for me because, I was sort of used to London where everything's a little bit more, in a way, a little bit more laid back at the time, a little bit more, easier, so to speak, because there wasn't, I guess what changes the balance is the money, and like in New York, they're paying X amount, you turn up, you perform. Sort of like London, there's very little cash involved, especially in the 70s. There was even less. So it was a little bit more easier in a sense. And I think what it did is it taught me a lot of discipline, professionalism, and led me to grow as a hairdresser. But going back, learning all the techniques that I even learned at technical college, and it wasn't called TAFE in those days in Australia. It was called Technical College, and I went to the one in Perth called Mount Lawley Technical College, and being forced to do finger waves, and I'm thinking, God, what are these women doing? I'm never going to use these. Cut to every day on Gatsby, every finger wave I did, I thought of those teachers and being wrapped across the knuckles, not doing them properly until I got them correct. I thought, I'll show you. I can do it now.
One of the things that's coming across, as you talk about your journey, is you've taken every opportunity really to learn and evolve and to become better at what you do. You're very
I think that's what life's about. I mean, to me, it is. I mean, I never feel complacent. I'm always wanting to learn, and I want to learn something new. And I've sort of I had this sort of joke, but it's not really a joke. They think it's a joke, but I'm sort of actually quite serious about it. So we go into a salon, and the guy says, "So what's new? What's happening?" I said, "I want you to show me something new. I want you to inspire me. I need to be inspired."
Do you still go into salons?
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, I think it's great to see what...
You don't do clients in the salon?
No. I don't think they'd want me in there.
Yeah. You have an affiliation with John Frieda, so tell me about that.
I have a contract with the John Frieda products.
Right, okay.
And I work very closely with them on when they're developing new products, and I'm testing them and things for them. I do a lot of promotional stuff for them. And John and the product company are two separate divisions.
Yeah.
But whenever I'm doing shows or whatever, I will go to the salon and get a whole bunch of kids to come and help me, and then we'll do like a training evenings. So this is how it's going to work. This is what I want to achieve. This is how we're going to do the show, and things. So it's like a little bit, and I go and do sort of little workshops with them sometimes, because they're incredibly helpful to me. I will sort of give back what knowledge I have. I did one quite recently, the importance of hair colour in film, which, they were sort of, what the hell is this about?
Yeah.
And I basically showed them how important it is to create either class structure, personalities, and things with the shades of hair colour and things that you can use on a person. Whether they're downtrodden, whether high maintenance, whether they're sort of like a real sort of full-on sort of hair victim.
Sure. You
know what I mean?
Yeah.
All those things portray in hair colour. You know what I mean? Whether the woman's going to be in there having a roots done, a highlights done every 6 weeks, or whether she's a sort of like a girl that maybe makes it every 6 months. Or whatever, know, and these are all important when you're building characters for film.
Sure. So just before we get back into the film thing for a minute, just back to the New York thing for a second. So you were there for 14 years. Was it? I mean, obviously, 14 years is a long time. Obviously, it did sort of satisfy you or fulfill your needs at the time. What was it you were doing there? Was it mostly editorial work, more advertising, more
editorial? A lot of advertising. I made a lot of money there.
Good on you.
Nice.
I noticed you paused before you said it. There's nothing wrong with making some money. Good at what you do. You should make money. Is that where you started film in New York? Was that your first introduction to film?
My first introduction to film is I did a movie with Tony Scott.
Right.
And what had happened is I was working very closely with a makeup artist who started designing makeup for film, and he used to cross over and do hair and makeup, and he worked a lot with Tony, and there was this job in Mexico, and apparently the girl that was doing the hair on the job wasn't fulfilling her position.
Right.
And I got a call in the middle of the night. I was in Italy shooting Italian Vogue, and I remember the phone going. It was before mobile days, obviously. And he said, "Listen, I need you to get to Mexico on Monday to work on this film. Can you do it?" And I went, He said, "We need to know now." And he said, "I don't know why you're contemplating. Have you done a film?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, so what do you? It's a learning curve." And I thought, all right, it is a learning curve, I guess. I thought, if it doesn't work out, I can always go home. It's always the sanctuary, Mount Barker was always going to be there for me.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I went back to New York, packed up, went to Mexico, and met, at the time, Kevin Costner, Anthony Quinn, and Madeleine Stowe, and I was doing the whole three of them for the film. It was a movie called Revenge. It was all about sort of politics, gangsters, prostitution, which I can identify with, obviously, after my experiences. It was an interesting experience. Great working with Tony. I really love working with him, and I did a few commercials with him after that as well. I never did another movie with him, which is unfortunate, but I really enjoyed working with him.
Yeah. What was the big difference between Because up until this point, you've been doing a lot of session work. What's the big difference between session work and film work?
Well, there wasn't a lot for me,
Right.
because basically, obviously, to do the boys' hair was pretty, I mean, in a way, straightforward. Anthony Quinn had to look like a diplomat, but sort of a gangster diplomat sort of thing. Kevin had to look sort of normal. He's ex-army, helicopter pilot, so it was pretty normal. Madeline, she was like a trophy wife, and he wanted her to look like a Helma Newton girl, which was perfect. I love Helma Newton girls.
Yeah.
Who doesn't? Yeah. I mean, got to be crazy not to. Anyway, so I turned her. And he said, I want to, like this Helma Newton girl, like this. So the wave over the eye and sort of under. She looks fucking hard. So that was good.
Yeah,
so it's fine. Let's carry on.
Yeah. So was that, and then you continued just doing films, or did you?
No. That was it. I went back to my editorial life, and then one of the boys on it that was working on it, one of the second assistants, got another movie to be set in Argentina, and it was about sort of white slavery in the 20s. So it was my first 20s movie, so to speak. And it was a movie called Naked Tango. And it was all about tango palaces, white trafficking young girls from Eastern Europe into prostitution in Argentina. And it was the same scriptwriter that wrote Kiss of the Spider Woman. It was a guy called Leonard Schrader, and he directed it as well. And it was, I think, not a lovely story, an interesting story.
Yeah.
But my father was the best critic on that, because after he'd seen Revenge and Naked Tango, he said to me, "Why can't you do something romantic? Because all these women are being abused." And I'm thinking, maybe I did something happened in my childhood I wasn't quite aware of. No. But anyway, no, so that was my first attempt at 20s, which I think looked okay. And so, I was going through my archives recently, and I found an old photo layout of the looks. And I thought, it doesn't look too bad. I'm not too embarrassed about it. So very, very late night TV, it still comes up now and again.
Yeah.
Because hairdresser said to me, "I saw that movie you did." And I did this sort of quite extreme little Louise Brooks for our leading lady, and everybody else had finger waves, but she was the only girl that had straight hair, because I wanted her to make her to look more modern than the other girls, so to speak.
What are some of the other movies you've worked on?
Right. Down memory lane now. Well, I've Eyes Wide Shut
With Stanley Kubrick.
Yes.
Yeah. That must have been amazing.
We shot for 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
2 years, and it was.
And is that the first time you worked with Nicole Kidman?
Yes, first time I worked with Nicole and Tom, and it was quite interesting, because before I was going to do the tests and things like this, Stanley was saying to me, I want to see all that hair. I want to see all those red curls. That's what I want. I want to see those red curls. I need like this. And I said, fine, okay. And I'm thinking, is he really looking at the face, or is he looking at the hair? Now, this is an incredibly intelligent, intellectual director I'm working with. So I'm sort of like, not tiptoeing, but I'm thinking he knows much more about film than I will ever know.
Yeah.
And then we did it, and he's great. He was happy with everything. And I said, Stanley, can I just show you one thing? He said, what's that? I said, just look at this. And I just took Nicole's hair with my hands, twisted it, and put one pin in it. I said, look at her neck and her jaw. He said, oh my God, I know what you're talking about. Suddenly you saw this skin, this beautiful porcelain skin and neck, and it just heightened and exaggerated everything. And I said, to me, it's more beautiful than a lot of the hair sometimes.
Extremely massive red curly hair, yeah.
And that's what we pretty much went through the whole film.
Okay.
There's scenes, obviously, with a couple of scenes with it down, but pretty much even bedroom scenes pinned up in one way, random way, or whatever.
Yeah, and that was 2 years in the filming. Right, okay.
Yeah.
That's intense.
I never thought I'd ever work again. I thought people probably think I'm dead.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is obviously a downside of film as opposed to editorial, isn't it?
You've moved yourself out.
Disappear.
You've moved yourself off the off the radar, so to speak. But it was a lovely experience, and also I was very flattered because he'd worked with people like Leonard and people like that before doing film. Because Leonard did all the hair for Barry Lyndon and all those wonderful movies he had done. So I was very flattered that I was put into that. No, I wouldn't say that category, because I think that would be sort of assumption. But to be thought of that I was getting to where he wanted to go as well. I think it was very nice. So that was my first introduction to Nicole, and from then on I went to do another movie. Straight after that I went to Sydney, which was I think where I first met you, where I did Mission Impossible 2. Right, okay. And with Tom and Tandy Newton. And that was all shot in mostly Sydney. And then from that, Nicole asked me to do a movie, and it's actually one of my favourite hair I've ever done on her. It's a movie called The Others.
Right, yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, which was all shot in Spain on stage in August in Madrid. It was as hot as hell, and because it's meant to be the Channel Islands, and it's all wintry and dark and grey and like this. And anyway, it was quite interesting because the director, who was incredibly talented, Alejandro Amenabar, he wrote the script. He learned to speak English to direct the film in English, and he composed the music. I mean, it's talk about genius levels.
Fantastic.
But he foresaw the character as sort of quite Victorian, sort of like with red hair and a chignon and things like this. And because you haven't seen the movie, you know how it works. I said, don't you think that's going to give the game away a bit? He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you've got Victorian hair and everything. They're all meant to be in this Victorian house, and it's not 1900. Why don't we sort of put a spin on it? So I gave a sort of like, almost like a 1930s sort of look. With a wave and sort of hair, and took the red out of the head and sort of almost made it a little bit more neutral, so it looked sort of a bit colourless. Yeah. So
your role doing hair for films is very much about developing a character. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. So it sort of says something without saying the dialogue, basically. Yeah. But when you look at someone, don't you think, like any hairdresser looks at someone and looks at their hair, and it tells you a story about that person.
Yeah, at some level, but I don't think a lot of people are aware of it. I don't think they even think of it.
They don't think of it, but it happens. And I think even if something's quite shocking, I remember this scenario once. I was in Ireland, and there was this lady sitting at the bus shelter, and she'd just come from the salon, and she had this lavender rinse and her little perm all done, sort of sitting there all perfect. She looked fantastic, by the way. She's sitting there absolutely perfect. This young girl goes by on a bicycle with purple hair, and she looks at her with such disdain, thinking, oh my God, this little punk kid. And I'm thinking, who's the outrageous one here? This lady with the lavender at the bus stop, or the one with the purple on the bike?
Yeah, exactly.
I think they're both the same level.
Yeah, exactly.
Of extremity, because naturally has lavender hair, and she's looking at her like this, and it was such a wonderful moment, thing, and so extremes, but basically they were both extreme, and it wasn't like. She wasn't looking as the youth thing, it was the hair colour. Yeah. And so that's saying so much about someone, I think. She thought she was absolutely normal.
Yeah. What do you prefer, film or session work?
I enjoy both. The thing is, I think I I think with film you have to please many more people. With fashion, you're pleasing less people. You've got you need to have the producers and the money and the actors and the DOPs and the directors and the costume designers all to please you. You're basically pleasing the photographer and the editors and things. So you have a lot less people to keep happy, so to speak. I think what I enjoy about both is creating the characters. So to me, what I enjoy about film is creating the characters, obviously. And once I've established them, the maintenance is a tough one for me to do.
Okay.
I can do it.
So the continuity.
The continuity, the doing it the same every day.
Yeah.
You know, whether you're like I did a movie called Australia in the middle of the outback with Baz, and to take the red dust out of the hair and put it back in every day. You know, right? So like, you know, it's like, oh God, here we go. And I had a little dust machine sort of winding this red earth into the hair, so it looked like it was, you know, because obviously you can't expect people to sleep with all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
I did read somewhere that someone said about you the reason you were so successful was because you were so quick. Is that something that you're renowned for? That you can really just get in there and get a look done and out of there? I mean, obviously they like that. I mean, you know, these things, there's a lot of money being spent by the minute. I mean,
Well, I think the thing is, I think speed comes with having to do hair for shows.
Yeah.
You know, fashion shows, you know, you've got 25 girls to get ready, and you have a team with you, but then it's your responsibility that it all looks finished and polished and things like this. They can do a lot of the groundwork for you. But I think it's very important that you... and I always think hair can be overworked. And I think the more you do to the hair, sometimes the worse it can get. And also, I think, you know, unless they're meant to look like they've just walked out of a salon, hair shouldn't really be overworked. Unless the script calls for, like, she's a multimillionaire and has her hair done every day, you know, and then the character would be something with a hairdo that's done every day and don't touch me sort of look. I think there should be a sort of a realness to it, and I think that realness can only happen if it's not laboured. And that's the way I work with it. You know, I'll do all my background work, but then I'll basically, in a sense, once I've finished getting the hair to the state I need it to be, I'll quite often dress it with my hands. Yeah. I don't use brushes or combs or anything, you know, to get it to that look where it looks like maybe, you know, it looks real in a sense rather than too manufactured. Because I think I also have this complex that I can do hair that's too done all the time. So I'm always conscious that how can I make that look less done? That's something I fight within myself. Yeah.
A lot of young hairdressers, hopefully listening to this, you know, might aspire to work more in the session work world or indeed movies. What core bit of advice would you give them?
Research.
Research,
I think, is the best to, you know, I mean, even in fashion and things like this, it keeps reverting back. We keep on looking at different periods, different decades, different things. I think we've been through the 20th century about 10 times. Like a friend of mine said to me, you've done this enough times, you should be able to get it right by now. You know, it's sort of like, how many times can we do 60s? How many go? But it's very important. I just did a movie recently called Grace of Monaco, which I had to do 60s and emulate Alexandre de Paris, who's one of the greatest hairdressers. And we filmed in France. I was as nervous as hell. I thought, my God, these French people are not going to let me out of here alive, copying one of their icons.
I thought it was beautiful. Hey, you did for that.
Thank you. But anyway, it's very important to research and what you do, and then take that and put it into what you're working with. You know, obviously I was doing my look on Nicole, but I was emulating what he had done on Grace Kelly, or Princess Grace. The the thing is, and the director was very clever, he said, I don't want you to copy it hair for hair. I want you to take that as the inspiration and put it into our go. Which is, I think, the correct way to do.
Yeah,
so because there's different balances, different face proportions, and different things, and also, what looked sort of appropriate at one period doesn't necessarily look totally appropriate now.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Even though the costumes and the times, it's all set in the things. Suddenly, if you come up with a sort of 18-inch towering hairdo, it can look quite sort of strange.
Do you have a favourite era? Favourite decade?
I used to. It was 20s, but I think I got it out of my system.
Right.
Gatsby.
Doing the Gatsby. Yeah.
No, I do. I do. I like all periods. I mean, I think it's great to get your teeth into things and sort of push your sleeves up and really get to the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's exciting, because that's what keeps it interesting. Because if you're constantly staying on one level and one train of thought, I think you must get incredibly bored. I mean, I've never done that, so I wouldn't. I would think. I wouldn't like to. I like to sort of throw it in the mix, so to speak.
I know sometimes you design the look for the film, and then you assemble a team of people because you physically can't do everyone on the set.
Of course.
Is there any particular frustration that you have of dealing with young hairdressers now who get on the set to do hair? Is there any sort of common thing that you just wish that people today would
I think enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm?
Yeah.
So they lack enthusiasm?
Yeah, I think a lot of people lack enthusiasm. And I quite often thought maybe I'm intimidating. I don't think so. I'm not one of those people you can't come and ask questions to. I'm happy to teach. I'm happy to give people knowledge. I'm not playing my cards close to my chest. I'm more than happy to give information, and I think it's the enthusiasm that I find lacking in a lot today, which I think, to me, we're in a great industry. We're a very, very privileged industry, so that we can have wonderful careers, wonderful life, and do some amazing things, and travel and do all these extraordinary things, with a hairbrush.
Yeah, exactly.
And hey, a lot of people, can't do that.
Yeah. Do you ever wish you'd done anything else?
What, being a dancer? No.
Besides ballet dancer. Yeah.
No. I don't know. I'm still learning hairdressing, so I need to get really comfortable with think, right, I've had enough of this, and then move on.
Yeah. So you've been doing it for how many years? 50 plus years? Well, hang on. Maybe I've aged you a little bit too much.
No, I'm coming up to my 50th year.
You're coming up to your 50th year.
Yeah.
You've worked on some of the biggest films in the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. You've worked on all the top magazines. You've worked with all the best photographers, all the best models, and you're still learning hairdressing.
Yeah.
It's a great attitude. Yeah, it's a fantastic attitude. Is there ever anything, has one person ever said something to you in life, anybody, that had a particular impact on you? Is there any statement, any sort of thought that runs through you that sort of sits at your core as that is really important to hang on to?
There's a few things, actually. There's a few things that keep me going, keep me inspired, so to speak. When I was a kid at Ernest's Salon in Perth, there was this quite tough hairdresser who was working in the salon, and I think like within my first few weeks of hairdressing anyway, and she was doing a chignon and things, and I was quite nervous. I was handing up all like pins to her, and I'd obviously had the incorrect pin for what she wanted, so she knocked it out of my hands and said, "How do you make more money on the street than you ever will in the hairdressing salon?" So every sort of chignon I do. I hope she's still alive and I hope she sees it.
Okay, yeah.
So that gives me the strength.
Yeah.
So every chignon in Princess Grace, I said, I felt like I hope you're looking at this. Carol, what's her name?
You probably feel uncomfortable, with people sort of calling you exceptional. And I have asked, I've asked other people the same question when I've interviewed them on previous interviews. If there was one thing that made you exceptional at what you do, because you must be exceptional because of what you've achieved and continue to achieve, what would that attribute, what would that characteristic, what would that personality trait be?
Well, I have to go back to passion, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really, really enjoy those moments when I get up and go to work. I enjoy the excitement of doing something or having to stretch my imagination, having to do some research or, and be involved. And I think in the industry we're in, I think it gives you a youthful outlook on life. And I find that's important as well, to understand what's coming through from the younger hairdressers as well, and basically hopefully be inspired by it. I'm looking for people to inspire me the whole time because I love to be inspired, and it doesn't necessarily have to be hairdressing. It can be fashion, it can be film, it can be photography, it can be a million things. You're part of a core. I've always said that the hair is a great accessory. It's like the girls struggle to have the right handbag at the moment. They'll spend their life savings on the latest handbag and the biggest bag or whatever it might be. But I think it's just as important to have hair that gives you confidence as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a great accessory.
Yeah. Yeah, without a doubt. What else do I want to wrap this up with? What does the future look like for you? Where will you be in the next 10 years? Do you ever think about retiring, or is that just... No.
I don't think I'm retiring. I think they're going to have to ship me out in a bag.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Drag me off the set somewhere, kicking and screaming. Why retire?
What would you do?
How excited am I going to be going to the studio? Not working.
Yeah.
I think that keeps me, like I say, inspired and excited, and also, I haven't actually quite finished what I needed to start out to do yet. I've got a bit more to do, and whether it's in, I've always sort of, throughout my career done sort of little bits of workshops and things like this, and I think I think is important, and I think is more rare as the years go on, is the art and craft of actual hairdressing. And that's what I love to do, is to dress hair. People are obsessed with cut and blow dry and things like this. And I think what has got lost along the way is a lot of hairdressing.
Yeah.
The actual art of transforming that piece of fibre into something that's totally different. And you don't have to turn it into a joke. You can turn it into something beautiful or glamorous or sophisticated or sexy or whatever. But I think the art of the word hairdressing, and there's one of my greatest icons in hairdressing is a hairdresser called Sidney Gilarov. And he created all those looks for Hollywood in the sort of 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Absolute genius. To me, he still inspires me every day.
And the amazing thing is, he didn't have the products that we have today. He didn't have the tools that we have today, the quality of the dryers, the brushes, etc., etc.
Yeah, and those things are magic.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you can only sort of take your hat off to someone like that, and that is a true creative force. Yeah, I think, and we still use those looks today. Whether it's a broken down version or a heightened version of what he did, they're still relevant. Yeah, and we're talking nearly 100 years ago. Quite extraordinary.
So your little bit of advice before, where you were talking about, as a kid, at technical college being taught finger waves.
Yeah.
It's like
It's
everything.
a
You need to
craft.
learn everything.
Yeah.
It's a craft.
It's a craft, and that will take you. And if you want to work on film,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're doing something, and it doesn't have to be 1920s. You could be doing something that's 18th century or Egyptian or whatever. You need to know the art and the craft of hairdressing, I think. And I think it's great to be able to just tap into it. It's sort of like when you think of your ability before I ever worked or handled a computer or something, the mind is a computer. Sort of like you give your water and a comb and you have to create. And I think that's actually
Pretty hardcore.
And it teaches you to manipulate hair and what hair will do for you and what you can do for it.
So what is your greatest tool that you have?
Well, I've got to say a comb.
Right. I thought you were going to say your hands.
No.
Right. A comb.
Comb.
Okay.
I think that definitely. I mean, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. One thing I want to ask you about is often people who are very, successful, and you've been very successful for many years. You've sort of, mixed with a lot of very successful models and photographers and people in the movie business. Is you must be exposed to a lot of temptation. It must be very easy for young hairdressers to go off the rails. And you've obviously managed to not go off the rails, or if you have, you've disguised it very well. What advice would you...
The rails are down there.
Talk to me about that. What advice would you give to youngsters about that?
Well, the thing is, when I'm working in that industry, I know I'm there. Basically, I am there. We're in a service industry.
Yeah.
We're there to make people look good and feel good. I've never ever assumed. I always think, oh God, when I'm staying in a lovely hotel at someone else's expenses and things like this, and I'm like, oh my God, this is a dream.
So you still feel like that?
Oh
now?
yeah. I just come back from somewhere and I was like, oh my God, I'm staying on the 21st floor of this really modern place. I thought, I've got to go home tomorrow.
Yeah.
But anyway, cut to no. We're in a service. There's a professional line. You are not those people. You don't have that lifestyle. You're not the person, the actor or the actress or the model or whatever. You're there, and it's I always stand back. There's a professional line, I think, and I've never really. I think what happens, some people I've known, they start to think they're part of that lifestyle, and I think that you're not. You're basically there.
And is that their undoing?
It can be.
Right.
I don't think it's necessarily all of their undoings, but it can be. I think you have to. I think you have to remember what you're doing, and also the next day I've got to get up and perform. So I couldn't sort of like go out on a night of champagne and whatever, and then get up and perform because it just doesn't happen that way.
How much of that humility, work ethic, whatever the right word is, would you put down to your upbringing, your country upbringing? The way you were brought up. I mean, I've never been there, but I can picture what it was like. A simple existence with a lot of honesty and a lot of integrity and a lot of humility, and that forms you as to who you are, doesn't it?
Also, I think growing up in a family that ran a business, you have to produce. It's supply and demand.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I learned from my parents and my brothers and sisters and things like this. The bread had to be delivered on time. It had to be in the bakehouse. It had to be there. My dad was up at 4 a.m. to get everything ready, so everything would be in the stores at 9. You know what I mean? And that's basically, if I'm doing something, I'm always early for work. I'm always, hopefully, prepared or prepped. I like to get there, even if it's going to do someone hair privately in a hotel room or something. I will get there beforehand. Everything's set up, so everything is where I know where it is on the table, so I can tap into it, which allows me to be able to afford to do the hair quicker because I know where everything is. I'm not spending half an hour looking in my bag trying to find, oh God, I need that product. Where is it? I will hopefully have everything in front of me, and that allows me to be able to do my job with the simplicity and the ease that I think it should be. I don't think hair should be torturous. I think hair should be a pleasure for someone, you know. And, you know, if someone's sitting there scrambling around looking through their kit, or have left their dryer at home, or something's not working, you know, you've got time to reevaluate, call an assistant, say, listen, can you get me a curling iron over here? This one's something, you know what I mean? So you've covered your basic, I call it old-fashioned professionalism.
Exactly. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
You know?
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, Mr. Kerry Warn, unfortunately, we have run out of time.
Probably talked your thing.
I would just like to say thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.
I know that there will be a lot of hairdressers out there that will listen to this, and hopefully some of the message that you have has inspired them to, you know, to move forward and to turn their dream into some of the things that you've experienced. So,
and hopefully inspire people that are not hairdressers to become one.
Exactly.
You know, we need you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to connect with us, you'll find us at growmysalonbusiness.com or on Facebook and Instagram at growmysalonbusiness. And if you enjoyed tuning into our podcast, make sure that you subscribe, like, and share it with your friends. Until next time, this is Anthony Whitaker, wishing you continued success.